Okay, we are ready for our final session of the day, and it's a great panel on leading the analytics organization, and it will be moderated by Paula Payton. Paula teaches for us here at Wake Forest, faculty member here in our online Master of Science in Business Analytics program, and she teaches the Leading the Analytics Organization, one of our two capstone courses in the MSBA program online. And so I will turn it over to Paula and let her introduce our outstanding panelists. Thanks, Paula. You're on now.
Okay,
You're
great.
good.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction, Jeff. And I also want to thank again Interim Dean Michelle Ream for sponsoring this great conference. Collectively, we have executives before us that really have about 80 years of experience that they're going to bring to this most interesting and edifying discussion around how they have built and developed analytics organizations. In addition to being sort of award-winning analytics senior executives of their own accord, they also spend a fair amount of time thinking about what the next generation of business analysts needs to be prepared for. Most or all of them sit on advisory boards at both Wake Forest and other institutions to help build those roadmaps for the next generation. So in terms of the format of this particular panel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to introduce all four of our esteemed panelists. Then we're going to have some questions that I will present to panelists in turn. We'll have plenty of time for questions, which again, Shannon McKean will be curating and handling for us at the end of the session. We'll have at least 15 minutes. Audience, I would ask that if you are interested in directing your question to a specific panelist, that you just include their name in the question that you pose, so Shannon can get that over to our panelists as quickly as possible. So, again, welcome. We're very excited to have you here. So let me first start with Pooja Dewan from Otis Elevator. She is the Vice President and Chief Data Analytics Officer for Otis Elevator Company, which is made to move communities, moving about 2 billion people a day. Although I'm sure the business has its ups and downs. She has been responsible for leading the company's data science and analytics capabilities. She drives the data analytics vision, strategy, execution. She is responsible for driving business growth as well as overseeing profitability using analytics. And finally, efficient data governance and processes. Prior to her time at Otis, she spent about 20 years at BNSF Railway, where she was the chief data scientist and recognized for the analytics efforts there, an award from Informs through some work that came out of her research and advanced analytics group. Pooja has a master's and doctorate in industrial engineering from Pennsylvania State University, Goethe and Lyons, and she also has authored several research publications in peer-reviewed journals. So welcome, Pooja. So very happy to have you with us. Our second panelist today is Ben Martin from Hanesbrands. He is the Chief Data Analytics Officer for Hanesbrands. He also has responsibility for analytics functions across the global organization. He spent the last 10 years at the company establishing analytics as a core competency, and he'll be telling us a little bit about his journey during that time. He leads the global planning function. He is responsible for demand planning, inventory planning, production planning, material planning, and capacity planning. Ben completed his doctoral work at North Carolina State University, and he is an expert in simulation-based optimization, process simulation, organizational design and development, and critical process improvement. He is a resident of Winston-Salem here with his wife and his son, and he's going to tell us how his work in analytics has helped us all find our perfect fit. I want to also introduce Olga Matlin, who has been with CBS for close to 20 years. She has worked in pharmacy, healthcare, and behavior change. First joining CVS Health in 2004. She's currently the Vice President of PBM and Specialty Pharmacy Analytics, leading a substantial group of data science and analytics professionals, identifying opportunities for program improvement, new program development, working in the areas of behavior change. She's a recognized expert in adherence and compliance issues, and of course, specialty pharmacy management. Her work with the analytics team spans from reporting methodologies to developing predictive and forecasting models that inform enterprise analytics, and also some of the great work in analytics and behavior change that CVS Health has done. And finally, we welcome to our panel David Dittmann of P&G. David has been at Procter & Gamble for, I think, close to 20 years as well. He is currently the Vice President of Data and Analytics and has global responsibility for analytics services, product supply, data science, oversees the data and analytics IT development, and the operations organization within the organization. David has had an interesting path. He has again worked with marketing, with product supply and sales organization, teaching them to use analytics in a way to sort of drive the business. That's not easy to do with a company as customer insights already focused as P&G. When he returned from Singapore a number of years ago, one of the first things that he did was establish customer analytics and data science as a core competency at P&G. Of course, David has spoken at a lot of conferences and also serves on advisory boards. So our panelists, again, have many, many other accomplishments, but we won't have time to go into them all today. So again, please join me in welcoming them to our panel. So what I'd like to do is start, Pooja, with a question for you. I think one of the things that was interesting this morning was Tom Davenport talked about, he referenced one CAO from USAA and General Motors, and he said one of the things that the CAO had said was he really doesn't have to spend too much time evangelizing anymore. Everyone is a believer. Pooja, if you would just talk to us a little bit about how you have built sort of an organizational culture around analytics, specifically how you've designed that organization to work optimally, and then finally, is it where you want it to be?
So thank you, Paula, and a great conference, and thank you for inviting, all of us to come speak with the next generation. It's always a pleasure to just pay it forward and share some, looking in the hindsight. When we were in their shoes, it was just great to hear people that had that kind of experience. So, Paula, coming back to the question you asked, I wish Tom's comment applied, in my experience at BNSF or at Otis Elevators. I feel, as a data and analytics leader, I spend probably a big portion of my time in the evangelizing and culture, the creation of the data culture itself. I've realized, even the best of the analytics, unless they influence the end user, they really do not create an impact, whether it's data or whether it's analytics. So, Otis has a very, very strong culture of innovation. So when I joined, there was a very fragmented look of that innovation culture itself. And so there were very federated processes of how people wanted to approach the problem itself. So the good thing is, if you have those tools available, you have, the mindset to understand, okay, how do I encourage the collaboration? Acknowledge the culture where there is strong innovation. So you don't want to shut it off. You want to enable it, but you also want to guide it in a direction where we can truly become one global voice in terms of having that visibility to drive the culture itself. And honestly, I have found in whether it is just the dashboardings that, or just creating the pure data as a product that my team does, or advanced machine learning AI, you need to have the stakeholders engagement in the mix that really talk the language and think about how that technology is going to impact. And, you can scream at the top of your voice, but really the end users need to hear it in an English that they're used to seeing and understand it. So, evangelizing what does it mean for the end user in their voice, creating, sort of nudges, whether there's a whole process part that you have to enable where you are evangelizing the conversation between, one salesperson and another salesperson, or one field person and another field person that talk to each other of how they are using that analytics in their job. Because that's far more, of a motivation factor than you being able to put it out there as an analytics team. And frankly, the teams we lead do not have that competency. So instead of trying to solve it all together internally, you need to think about it cross-functionally. So, Paula, would love to be in the place that Tom described. Hopefully we'll get there. But till then, I think I'll continue to focus a lot on data cultural awareness, data literacy as well.
Well, Pooja, I'm glad you offered that. I think it's probably a fair state that the evangelization work is never quite done, right? Because there are so many new use cases, so many new ways of applying that while many understand sort of the value of having analytics embedded in the culture, there continues to be the opportunity as leaders to sort of continue to beat that drum, right? So tell us a little bit about, and then we'll move to another panelist. Tell us, give us a sense of how you've approached sort of building that culture inside of your organization at Otis.
So excellent point. So you have to really recognize, you've heard the word culture eats strategy. So I think as I approached Otis, 2 years ago, I had to observe the culture. I had to observe the maturity of the data landscape itself. And then having done this for, several decades, having the experience to know what can I really take Otis to, how do I build it in that way? So I realized one of the things, like I mentioned, the federated data landscape. While it's beautiful to enable some of the innovation, it can also come at a cost. So how do I enable that based on giving the value that the business was focusing on? So I realized we had to focus on some platform work, which I know most data and analytics leaders do not want to talk about because it's not the sexy portion of, it's not the AI, it's not the machine learning portion, but it's a key enabler. Honestly, through the day, you heard even, I heard Jack talk about the cloud enablement. I mean, honestly, that is the way our teams are working. So we have to have those kind of skills enabled in that conversation. So focus on the platform from internal perspective of enablement, but I didn't go and solve it all. I focused on truly what business was trying to solve. I said, okay, I'm going to get those business strategic questions and say, okay, how am I going to build the platform to enable that business strategy? Because that's what the business is focused on. So if I enable it in a way that they can now do things much more faster, much more nimble, the art of the possible that they haven't seen, then it'll really help out. So that enablement was part of a strategic thought process that I was focusing on the use case. I still haven't yet solved for everything, but I'm focusing on the use cases. But then the second thing was also understanding, again, remember, culturally we are used to, so change management is a huge thing. I can build the best analytics. I have the best user experience, but if I do not have people that understand their roles are now different, I don't have leaders that understand that we will really need their help to embed this in the way we work in Otis, then it's not going to be successful. So at the same time, I was also growing those networks. And I have now built very strong allies, whether it's in the field and the sales, where they are the spokespeople. I mean, the beginning stages were me planting those seeds. Now they speak that language and they talk about it. And we have enabled them with what I would call as analytics on analytics, where we share with them, okay, what we built for you, who's using, who's not using? Can we help you understand so that you can focus on training? You can take it to the staff meetings of the leaders, the P&L leaders that will see, who is using, and also show you some use studies to say, okay, branches that are using or the salespeople that are using, see the KPI impact on them. It is really driving the bottom line for you. So, you have to kind of think about it from the enablement perspective as a technical leader, but also from the perspective of from the business leader who's got just too much going on. They are worried about their P&L KPIs that they need to focus on. So how do you get their teams to get excited and get those leaders to really help you out in that journey?
Sounds like you've been marvelously effective at building that data democracy in a number of ways. So Pooja, thank you. David, let's jump over to you and see your response to some of these questions about, you early on at P&G were instrumental in sort of bringing analytics into various functional units of the company. Help us understand a little bit about how that worked and how you think about building the right organizational culture these days in your current role.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. I think it's a good question. I think that a lot of the times we kind of think about analytics, at least in P&G, in two components. One component is in terms of you want to be part of the business processes. You want to almost become like electricity. And you're just so critical to what the company is doing. So as we think about use cases, as Pooja was talking about, where to look, you have to allocate some of your use cases as you get started to where can you be like electricity. Now, there's also a problem with electricity because people only notice it when it goes out. So you can quickly become forgotten. You can quickly not be, part of that leading edge. So probably not very creatively, we also reserved a part of our portfolio that we call the wow. What is that? I know that Tom Davenport was talking about stay away from the shiny objects. That is absolutely true, but there's an aspect to the shiny objects. And those shiny objects help get you the seat at the table, help you be relevant, and help you kind of get those new opportunities. So I know a lot of it has been evangelizing the power of analytics. Part of it has been how do you get embedded into processes? How do you really push things forward? And then you also have to be very aware of the culture. And one of the aspects that I know I've made mistakes on in my career, I've tried to jump too far ahead. I say, I can optimize this system, and then I wonder why it's not implemented. And the problem is I went too far ahead of what the business can absorb or handle. And it's really setting that path to bring the company along. I think that, you mentioned then the culture, how do you set it? And, I think that COVID has done one great thing for P&G, which is, it's probably done it for everywhere. It's that acceleration of technology that people are more comfortable with technology. So maybe some of those analytical executives or people that used to ignore analytics, they're now more open. So also part of that data literacy culture, I find myself talking more about upskilling or reskilling or whatever the right term is to help bring them along in that journey. So that's been a great opportunity to continue to accelerate on that culture.
Thank you. Electricity. That was electric. That was electric, David, in many ways. Thank you for that. But I'd like to, and I'm sure the audience did as well, kind of this honest admission where we have certainly all been there, where we do jump too far ahead in certain areas, and cadence and climate control has to precede culture change, right? I mean, you sort of, when you're introducing, particularly if you're working in an organization that's been around since the 19th century, and I think many of us on the panel have been doing that, you introduce a new capability, in your words, electricity, to sort of help solve those consumer problems faster. And of course, COVID has accelerated the need for agility and sort of speed and insight into the customer issues and challenges. Those are all very, very useful observations. Actually,
I think the building on that point.
Yeah.
Right. I was actually thinking through. I actually celebrated my 24th year at P&G yesterday. Hard to believe, but I did. But I was thinking through back of the failures maybe that we've had, and I could only count 2 of the projects I've worked on over those 24 years that have ever failed because of the math. the math wasn't right, we couldn't do the math. It was always the other, frustratingly, it was always the other stuff. It was either we didn't have the data, or we didn't create the experiments to get the data, or Pooja mentioned it many, many times, change management, right? Those were the two areas that we consistently fail on when we have project failures, and it's rarely the math. I can only count two. And, that also becomes important as you approach problems. It's, we all get trained on math. We're all experts in statistics and various methodologies. And normally that's not what trips us up.
Totally agree. And yet it is a classic error that we can all make if we're grounded in data science and analytics, because we tend to use that tool first. We'll just look, the data just shows very clearly what we ought to be doing. And yet if you have sort of an existing way of doing things, there's of course going to be a little bit of pushback. I wanted to jump on something else you said, because it reminded me of something that Dan and David said in their talk, our friends from Kroger. They said something interesting, which is old fears have subsided in COVID. And one of those old fears that have subsided was resistance to change and avoiding failure at all costs. What did you think of that?
I thought it was a great statement. In fact,
Yeah.
I was talking with Doug earlier this week about that. And I think what changed, maybe saying it in a slightly different way, is I always used to think about analytics getting deeper and deeper. The trends were analyze more granularity, have more and more, call it technical depth and specialization in each of these areas. And it was all about how do you get deeper. And really what I found in COVID, it was about getting wider. It was suddenly, how can I look across more data sets? How can I stitch what little data I have at the time, together to change the models, all these time series models that we had painstakingly built, and whether they're technically AI or time series or something else, none of them work. None of them are going to predict toilet paper or whatever happened with that.
Right.
No one's ever going to predict that. And we had to throw out a lot of those models. We had to become, frankly, better analysts, a lot more scrappy, to look across different data sets. I was kind of joking with the team where, data science kind of subsided and business analysis really grew during this time. And almost some of those skills that we'd gotten so narrow in the, we don't need to understand the business, the data will tell us what's going on, to, well, no, take a step back. The business, you really need to understand the business. You still need some data. You just need different types.
I'm so glad you made that point. The pendulum did swing, and now it's sort of swinging back. But I think I agree with you. I mean, I think it's sort of, for better, for worse. We all try to watch for how consumer behaviors are changing, but COVID just sort of forced us into looking at those dynamics quicker and perhaps in different ways than we ever had before. So very, very interesting time. All right, let's talk now about some other ideas. Olga, I would love to direct this question to you. I want to get into a little bit around some of the use cases. I don't know if anybody else is going to be dreaming of flying hot dogs. But I would love, Olga, because you're some of the work you're doing right now and probably for the last few years in your particular role, you have been able to sort of pull the lever of data and analytics in new and powerful ways, I would say. Can you share with us just sort of any recent or several recent success stories where specifically a data-driven decision was reached as a direct function of the analytics? And if you could comment a little bit on some of the challenges or hiccups along those lines, but please, any example or use case would be great.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's my pleasure and privilege. So, as you mentioned in the introduction, a lot of work we do is in adherence to drug therapy. The famous statement about drugs don't work for people who don't take them. If you think about the space of specialty medications, those are for complex, chronic, mercifully somewhat rare conditions like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis. The other issue to add here is cost, and cost, of course, is an issue with other medications as well, but in specialty conditions, the cost of individual medication is hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. And so adherence becomes not only adherence to drug therapy, meaning that patients regularly fill their medications, utilize their medications, becomes not just the issue of treating the condition and seeking either improvement or stability, but also it's an issue of waste. If the patient isn't going to use the medication at the right level, then all that expense and, all that pain sometimes and side effects that go along with those few additional doses for the patient are really not going to bring any value. And you can sort of take this thought experiment even further to suggest that if they're not going to be adherent and derive the benefit from the drug, maybe it's better not to sort of get engaged with this at all. But of course, when patients fill medications, we try to support them in refilling them on time with refill reminders and clinical support. And so one of the success stories I wanted to highlight that really has become sort of a foundation for our engagement with this particular area of organization, as others talked, it's the business buy-in and the initial evangelizing that is so important. So I feel like we, in this project that I'll describe further, that we were able to build the foundation of success with a little bit of wow and a little bit of innovation and a little bit of, just something new and bringing people on board that this works, that really allowed us to then explore other solutions with an audience that was much more open to these conversations. So in a way, as I look at this use case, we were fortunate and at the same time not so fortunate that the area we were engaging in was not really supported by analytics, certainly not by data science or advanced data science to an appreciable degree. So to an extent, it was a low-hanging fruit, which was to optimize the interventions that go to patients. And so frequently these outreaches are based on either business rules or just a business decision that our key performance indicators of refills in the pharmacy are low. Let us design a phone call campaign to call patients whenever it's convenient for us to get them to refill their medications. And there is sort of not a question of what is clinically appropriate necessarily. There is certainly not a question of is it convenient for the patient to be calling them, during whatever business hours or, the evening. Think about catching a busy parent at home with their kids or, some other situation with inconvenient hours. Certainly no recognition of, maybe people don't want to get phone calls these days and some digital channels would be more convenient to interact with and react. And furthermore, the coordination of phone calls and the digital channels, because I think we all have heard the horror stories of being endlessly bombarded from the organization for which you sort of happen to engage here and there by the outreach that is trying to engage you further. So what we were successful at building is a set of patient assessment and segmentation models that allowed us to contact them at the right time, in the right time in the cycle of utilization, in the right time of week and day, experimenting with the right message, experimenting with the right channel, and also looking at the clinical situation and appropriate levels of adherence, and in some cases even looking at which drug they're utilizing and maybe we shouldn't be reaching out. And one other aspect that we incorporated into these models is that we were reaching out to patients that actually, we started reaching out to patients that actually needed our help. Because some of the patients are on top of their medications and they're going to refill on time and it's going to be fine. And we really don't need to waste precious resources on calling those and, annoying them in the process. And then there are some patients that rely on the communications that already existed. And then there were some patients for whom those communications were not enough. So bringing modeling and segmentation allowed us to optimize the intervention capacity And so from the business perspective, what we were able to achieve is a significant increase in refills and a significant improvement to KPIs that the business was worrying about in terms of reporting to our clients, in terms of reporting to also pharmaceutical manufacturers that are giving us access to these drugs, to our ability to dispense these drugs. We were able to demonstrate that we were able to fill more medications, but they were not just more medications, they were sort of the right to the right patients, because what we don't want to do is drive up costs. Again, these are very expensive things and primarily covered by plan sponsors. So it's a huge balancing act. And so we were really able and are continuing to focus on the balancing act. And as a result of sort of optimization of resources, we are now reaching out in a coordinated way, digitally, electronically, sometimes very rarely through print. But the phone call, the most intense phone calls, the outbound phone calls, and the clinical, the clinical personnel that makes those, because it is the clinical personnel that makes those for these complex conditions, they're actually now able to reach more patients that require that support, that need and benefit from that support. And so I'll sort of close the story with where I started, that this was a foundation of our engagement with this particular business group. And we are now looking really at a spectrum of their business issues. We are their trusted partner. In fact, my team is in a meeting with them now discussing the various projects that we've initiated and what else is in the pipeline.
This is very exciting. I mean, I think what an elegant solution to such an important problem, right? By taking the tools in your toolbox, right? Using better segmentation models to help solve that critical problem of just in time sort of, and using the right channel, of course, that's appropriate to that particular patient. I think that's a really nice example, and certainly points to the future of how to use analytics to really fulfill, I think, the stated mission at CVS Health. So thank you for sharing that. I want to circle around to Ben and have you, Ben, answer a little bit along the same lines. If you can share with us sort of a recent success story where you feel that your team accomplished, I'm sure, of course, there are many, but one that you think would be interesting in particular, where a decision was reached as a direct function of the analytics in your group. And if you would comment a little bit on any of the challenges or roadblocks, that would be great.
Sure,
Where are you, Ben? There you are.
Yes, sure. Thanks for the opportunity and the invite. Great to be here speaking today. So I would highlight, we just recently finished a really deep interrogation, highly analytical interrogation at that, of the portfolio of our products. And those are with a real focus on going and reducing the complexity in the offer itself, very much through the lens of the consumer. And I think this highlights the kind of like the cross-functional collaboration that's required. I think David hit on that quite a bit in their comments, and the incredible importance of focus, right? So one of the reasons this has been a success is that we've had a very clear business problem that was expressed, as a decision that needed to be made. And then we go and apply, a sophisticated set of analysis to it. And then as Pooja, I really like the way she phrased evangelizing back in the vernacular of the business user, how important that is, so that we go garner their support and buy-in and acceptance and ultimate adoption. And in the end, we end with the business behaving different than they were before, right? And so what's important about that is, if you think through the flow, we begin with the business and we end with the business. And it's in that way that we as analytics practitioners, we can avoid finding what I call fun and interesting facts, right? That just result in and no action, and ultimately no business impact.
I like that. That sort of resonates with that. Avoid those shiny balls, unless of course they're useful, and then by all means, pick them up and deploy them. Was there anything else as you went through that that interrogation, right? And was there anything other than discipline, which you just called out, that was critical in driving that process or in helping realize its success?
But one, staying super connected with the business. Obviously, the second that I would call out is that, and I think David hit this a little bit, and I'll put it in slightly different words. Is we know we need to know when good is good enough. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we moved with the right amount of speed and urgency and tenacity to get to an answer that was good enough to take the action, right? Because we could still be studying it and working on it if we wanted to, instead of being in the middle of implementing and executing currently.
Great, thank you. Okay, my next question builds on this. It's directed to everybody in the panel. So panel, please put your mentor hats on and speak to the students in the audience, or speak to those that are beginning their career. In your individual experiences, what do people often overlook or underestimate in terms of a barrier or an impediment to success with analytics that you can relate to our students? And I'll just sort of do a circle around as you think about it. David, do you want to jump in first? What's often overlooked or underestimated, a barrier to success with analytics from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, I think that the first one is going to be maybe counter to what you say. I think that most of the barriers we put up are self-inflicted, right? And yes. It's a matter of really identifying the problem and then figuring out how do you get through it. And I think the biggest challenges I've had throughout my career is thinking there was a barrier there, and I didn't push through it enough. So I think that'll be the first. From a work standpoint, from a personal development standpoint, I think it's continuous learning and networking. Whether I have the opportunity through the Wake Forest board or other elements, it's when you have those opportunities in your career, it's incredibly helpful to have people you can bounce ideas off of and those types of things. And it requires continual investment in yourself as well. And that starts almost from the moment you leave until you retire, whenever that is. There's that investment element in yourself that you need to continue to do. And that can be hard at times. It doesn't have to always be analytics. It may be in your domain, wherever your industry you're working in, learning more about that. But whatever it is, it's that continual investment. And it's easy to say, and everyone shakes their heads and says, yeah, of course. And it's completely different to actually carve out time to figure out how to do it and do it. And that's probably the largest differentiator I see.
Great pieces of advice, David. Thank you. Students, take note. Pooja, how about you? Overlooked or underestimated barriers as you look back in terms of success with analytics?
Yeah, so I think David's hit two great points. I think when you have certain tools in your toolbox, you jump on solving the problem right to begin with itself. And then you also have been taught enough that these problems are hard to solve, these problems are easy to solve. So you try to abstract the problem and even make it a different problem than it's supposed to be. So what I call it's the jungle of hows. I think we forget to stop asking the question of what are we doing and why are we doing it. I think that what and why, that keep asking that enough times with your stakeholders to truly understand the problem you're trying to solve before you get into the jungle of house. Because once you get into the jungle of house, understand we are all tech geeks. We are going to be lost in that jungle for a long time. And we're going to be just be happy, and every issue that comes up, we're going to associate and think it is a technology issue to solve. Really not necessary. So that's very, very important to understand. I think David's also hit a very great point of, continue to invest yourself, or what I would call as continue to learn. Keep that curious mindset. The technology that we are dealing with is moving so fast. It's so fast that it's unbelievable. I mean, I will tell you, even if you're the best data scientist, if you do not have the skills to operate in the cloud, you do not understand that world to be able to be comfortable in it, you don't understand the mindset of how agile teams work, so I can manage the risk and keep giving deliverables in small bite-sized chunks, so I never create a big failure, learn from it kind of thing. I focus on the persona mindset where I am really, these were adjacent skills. People used to think these are all computer science. This is not math, this is not analytics, but honestly, it's a very blended skill. If you are solving IoT problems, the other things to think about it, if the connectivity is not there, if your sensors or your controllers that are generating data are not giving a signal that your models can use to predict, your precision and accuracy are never going to come there. So unless you open up your mindset to understand, can I truly construct experiments to identify where is the issue I need to solve? And guess those skills are adjacent, and really no team sees it at their own. Okay. And then there's this big data aspect of it that, we are dealing with big data, but there are people in the business that have to deal with it, but that have no skills. So I think there is also this team spirit where we need to understand there's a continuum of skills that are required to make projects successful. And the people that start spanning and understanding and focusing on the problem solving rather than just focusing on this is what I have as a tool and this is how I'm going to solve it, really make sure that the projects are successful. And then the last one is, you need to make sure you are truly having some stakeholders in the mix. And that means you need to learn on polishing your communication skills. And the stakeholders are also giving you the kind of feedback. So mixing sort of process in the mix, there are some recipes out there that you can follow to help out. But from your perspective, if you are making sure that you are learning from that, I want you to introspect and see and say that it's not just me solving the problem and putting a graph out there or a complicated thing. You have to think about, okay, what am I wanting the person to take away from it? And believe me, even the PhDs will not be able to see 15 charts and be able to walk away that you are, because your mental model is already connected to it. So that aspect of understanding that, okay, there's only 2 or 3 things that people can walk away with. What do I really want them to be walking away with? So you see where I'm going over here. Have the confidence to understand your technical skills, but also understand everything doesn't need to be solved with hammer. Also understand you need to continue to invest so that you have a lot of tools put in your toolbox that you have. So you can really bring in the adjacent skills that are required. And then really keep engaging with the stakeholders also, because those communication skills will truly help you manage and understand what are you really trying to solve and why before you keep getting lost in the house.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pooja. I can tell you build roadmaps because you just provided a very astute roadmap to our students in the audience. Olga, let me just have you weigh in a little bit and then we'll close with Ben and move on to a couple questions because we're going to run out of time. Olga, any thoughts on?
Yeah, for sure. I think there were a lot of things that were mentioned definitely by Pooja and David and also in the discussion today. But the one that sort of nuance that I would like to expand on in these conversations is around business partner engagement and sort of think about levels of business partner engagement and what sometimes happens and how to navigate it. So, these days the senior leaders know that they have to compete on analytics, and analytics have to be used, and advanced analytics can really help solve these big problems that exist in the business. And so it sort of looks like there is stakeholder engagement, because the senior leader in the company said, to his team, you need to engage with analytics to solve your problem. And we come in and we make a pitch, and we're very excited because guess what? A senior leader sees the value of our work and has given us a really important business problem to solve. And then sometimes, frequently, kind of the reality on the ground hits, where the group that you're trying to engage with is not ready for you. And I think in the UPS example, that was given very clearly, right? We built a great thing, and then it's, the team on the ground does not think of it as theirs. They're doing things their own way, and your new way is hard to adapt, is not quite what they need, etc. So I think there is, again, this sort of fallacy of thinking, or, sort of thing that is easy to believe, that I got stakeholder engagement because I was asked to do it. But the question is, who were you asked to do this by, and who else do you have to bring on board? And the answer is, again, as we saw in the UPS example, is to get people on the ground, literally, to buy in with the solution you're bringing. And so, as others said, communication, different approaches, perseverance, all of those come in.
Those are very wise words, actually. You're right. And fallacious, it can be fallacious indeed when you feel like you've gotten green lighted, and yet, in fact, unless you have that support from below, it's going to collapse. Ben, let me close with you if you can possibly add anything there. I'm sure you can.
with kind of 3 points. So one, I think you've heard all of us really articulate how important it is for analytics to be inextricably linked with the business, right? And the reason for that is that, in my belief and experience over the last 20 years or so, is that working relationships, they really prosper when we make the jobs of others easier. How do we go make the jobs of others easier? We go focus on the business problem that they're having, and we come to them with a nice solid solution to it. Second, I think a good learning over the years has been that, it's okay to fail. As long as we learn from it and we become agile in it, we adjust and we pivot and we know when to punt. And then the third point I think I'd close with is that some of the best advice I got early on in my career in terms of how you go be successful, depending on what you define success as, is that and it's two simple words, is get results. We got to really focus on results.
Yeah.
As analytics, I come back to what I was saying before, we as analytic practitioners got to be super careful not to find fun and interesting facts, right, that result in no impact to the business. If it just lives on a PowerPoint somewhere or what have you, and nothing becomes of it, then that's a good way to have an impediment to the long-term success of your analytic organization.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, let's move on to I think one or two questions. The time has just flown with you guys. Thank you so much. So obviously you wouldn't be where you are if you weren't wildly adept at sort of leading analytics teams through changing times, right? So a little bit of a predictable question for you, but as working from home has become more predominant during the pandemic and consumers are pivoting, how has this changed your business? And number two, did analytics play a role in helping your teams adjust to the new normal? Let's see. David, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that,
sure.
Absolutely. I think one of the things my team had going for it, we were already global. We were very used to having remote meetings, very used to different time zones. very used to those types of things. I think that one of the things that changed for us was the business questions fundamentally changed. So the work that we were used to doing, I was not used to a situation where Charmin toilet paper is completely sold out, and when we make it, where do we ship it? Right? Everyone wants it. So where do you ship it? We almost had the COVID vaccine problem for toilet paper. Where do you ship it? How do you make those decisions? That's not a problem in my industry that I work in. You typically have, right? You typically are able to produce to demand, typically, in those situations. So we also had to, as a general statement, analysts are very introverted, and because of that, it can be hard to people can very much withdraw in a situation like this. So we would go and continue to go out of our way to maybe even do silly things like we're all going to have lunch together, even though we're all remote. We're just going to eat our lunch together and talk, but very just things like that, trying to keep the team together. We have people who started on the analytics team, but also P&G a year ago that I've never seen and never met, and have only been to P&G one time to pick up their computer. It amazes me how well they're doing too. I think there's also been an opportunity to step up as well that people have done. But I think that it's very much making sure that you're able to get out and making sure that you reach out as well, and move, help the team continue to come along. Maybe the last statement, you have to be very clear on what you want to accomplish. There's not that hallway chatter. You have to be very, very clear. Here's the projects we're going to do. Here's the requirements. Here's the expectations, and over communicate to a way that probably at least I was not doing before. And that's been a big learning.
Absolutely. That digital water cooler, right, effect, or how we think about that. Great, thank you. Anybody else want to talk about it? Again, did analytics play a specific role in helping, or in tech, as David touched on, play a role in helping your teams adjust to the new normal? Any just sort of comments on that looking back? Olga, yeah? Oh, let's just unmute you.
Oh, thank you.
There you are.
I'd like to add a very small thing, just to put in context. We primarily work with secondary data in our business, so it's there already for us. But to David's comment about lack of water cooler and, lack of me being in the building and sort of being able to gauge kind of the temperature, if you will, we utilize surveys, primary data collection. And I think, a sort of small note, I got information from my team about stop making us turn on video on Zoom probably a few months before all the articles that said stop asking people to turn video on Zoom came out. So, we sort of analyzed ourselves, and it was very helpful.
That's a great example. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's jump on to our last question. Shannon, are we good for time? I want to make sure we're
good. Yep.
Okay, one last question. Okay. So I was thinking about, I don't know if any of you, well, I guess going back to Dan and David's talk, they were talking about, military grade cameras inside of the store, and that made me think of in-flight refueling. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a Hercules C-130 get fueled in flight, but that's almost the speed at which our businesses operate, right? We don't have time to land the plane and refuel and go back up. We are now sort of refueling as we fly, and that oftentimes this idea of how do we get more agile, more faster, more automated as an organization? So I have two questions, and I'll split them across our panel. Number one, even before the pandemic, the move to automation was indisputably underway, right? And certainly senior leadership like yourselves probably led that charge. I'd love to hear about the areas of your organization right now that you think are specific beneficiaries of that you're really trying to move more into automation. If there are, specific areas like call centers or customer service, getting more focus and more investment. Love that. Just some thoughts around automation. David, I think I saw a hand raise. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk through that.
Great.
I think the framework is simple. So the question, everything is too manual. Everything we do is too manual.
Yeah.
So, but we always tend to think about a simple 3-step model. You got to digitize it first. What are you going to measure and digitize it? Then you have to simplify the process. And only then do you automate it. You don't want to automate inefficiencies. So things like robotic process automation, it's not, it's certainly not the shiny object, but it's something that drives tremendous business value. Things like UiPath, things like Blue Prism, that basically do what I used to think of as Excel macros, of copying data from different systems and bridging some of these IT gaps. So I think that, obvious places where there's, lots of people is in our transportation and warehousing area. And I don't mean people loading trucks. I mean people trying to be on the phone. Where is the truck? Do we have the right planning? All that planning effort are just huge opportunities to automate and digitize, along with actual products. I believe Doug talked through the technology component, which I think is outstanding.
Yeah.
The technology component of how can we bring robotics, that's very analytical in many cases, to transform roles and jobs. And frankly, it's not always about headcount reductions or Machiavellian things like that.
Yeah.
It's about agility and better, and deploying that capacity elsewhere. I can't stand it when I hear people graduating from Wake Forest or other great institutions, and they tell me their first job is doing reporting. Yeah, reporting's required, but it's like, oh, you have so much more you can do.
Yeah.
And we want to get out of that. It may be comfortable, it may be easy. Those are great places. Where can we automate this and move that talent to do just incredible things?
Thank you, David. That's phenomenal. And that's a quote just that we need to sort of tattoo on our foreheads, right? Everything is too manual. Pooja, I think it looks like you definitely want to comment on that one. So
I think I'm going to ask what David said. I mean, if you think about it, all of us have been doing our PA in our way for like decades now. I mean, any technology person was writing, whether it's macros and scripts to do stuff. So it's not all about reducing headcount over there. It's about bringing that efficiency in the last moment. So, and David's hit a very great point. I mean, I want to bring in one of the use cases we just enabled itself was where there was a lot of time being spent by field to just capture information. That first step of digitization was not there. And we enabled it, and you should have seen it from the field perspective. For them, it was the best thing since sliced bread, because you saved for them, several hours in a week and help them focus on what their real job is about. So you have to really think about it from that step itself to see, what value you can bring in that itself. Also, from our perspective also, as you look at data quality, how can we really uncover the challenges we see itself before the end users start telling us? So there's plenty of ways where we are not really reducing people, but giving better quality and information that people can really trust and focus on their jobs. Because data is now everybody's job. I mean, it enables and fuels everyone.
Another quotable, absolutely. Data is everybody's job. Thank you. Thank you both. And then I'll just do the last question for Ben and Olga. This is just around just reflecting on the pandemic. Has it changed the demand for analytics in your organization in terms of volume of demand and or the mix of projects? Looking back over the last, year and a half, coming out the other side. Olga, do you want to start, and Ben can close with some thoughts about that?
I think for us, in healthcare initially, and especially in the benefits administration space of healthcare, initially there was a considerable increase in really questions about what, give me a set of numbers, and what was underneath that is really anxiety about what is going to happen, how do I manage my healthcare budget, et cetera. So there was definitely an increase sort of initially. And then I would say, I don't want to say it was business as usual, but we sort of went back to our core business of supporting patients with all of their medical needs while, areas of the organization maintain the supply chain. And as I say, I think the pharmaceutical supply chain, for the most part, acquitted itself fairly well. We'll see what the final story is on vaccine distribution. But as far as medications that were hoped to be sort of helpful treatments for COVID initially, there were some suggestions of trouble, but I think it worked all right. Can always be better, but all right. So, there are certainly areas of the organization that focused on that. But for us, we really focused on supporting patients through the pandemic. I talked about adherence and access to medication. I think really, as we talked in another setting recently, the thing that is affecting analytic work maybe to a greater extent than COVID is the greater social situation and awareness, and the pointers on the disparities in health outcomes, the socioeconomic disparities in health outcomes. I would say that is becoming a greater focus, and focusing analytic work on that aspect more so than COVID.
Bravo. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Ben, any last thoughts on that? And then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Sure. So we've seen such a dramatic uptick in the breadth of work that we work on. So David was describing the effect that we've seen in toilet paper, but just broadly, we saw the economy, the retail environment come to an almost standstill, and now we're arguably in a historic bullwhip of demand in it. So it has required such an amount of agility. As our team is a centralized team, and we support many functions across the business. So the ability to quickly pivot from working on a supply chain problem to a sales problem to a marketing problem, it's been very critical, and just highlighted how capable analytic professionals are, and the universal application of their skill set to many different types of business use cases. That's been like super rewarding and exciting to see.
What a fitting close, Ben. Thank you for that observation. Yes, I think that's exactly true. Well, Pooja, Ben, Olga, David, thank you for sharing your perspective this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who's already queued it up, and he's going to share a few questions with us. But on behalf of the attendees and Wake Forest, thank you for loaning your time. You're managing hundreds of people across multiple lines of business. Your time is valuable, and we thank you so much for joining us. So, Shannon, what do we got in the
Thanks, Paula. And I echo the appreciation and thanks to the four panelists. There's one question, and it's a selfish question I have for the students. It's a bonus for the students that are here. A number of them are still here. The Wake Forest students are all finishing up their practicum projects. So in the next 3 weeks, they'll be making presentations about their results to the organizations they've been working with. And some of them may be fortunate enough to be making presentations to a chief analytics officer or someone who's the equivalent to a member of your staff. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, when you're seeing presentations from folks that are 2 or 3 layers down in your organizations, what really grabs your attention? What either, oops, this person needs more training because of these mistakes, or this is really an impressive person. So what advice would you have to the students that are going to be making presentations on their projects to you or the equivalents of your staffs? And I guess I should say, David, you're unmuted, so you can go first.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's maybe going to be way too specific, but I'll give you a few of them. A few words on the slide. Otherwise, you'll end up reading the slide. Very few words on the slide. Another example. Tell me your answer first, and then tell me your logic. I hate having to wait an hour to guess what the recommendation is going to be. Tell me the answer first, along with the options that you studied. And then the last element, again, very, very tactical. I probably have somewhere between probably on average 15 meetings a day and hundreds of emails. So what that means is I get confused on the details of various projects. So if you can start with a short background to help me remember exactly what the project is, what scope you were looking at, then tell me the answer, then tell me the options you studied. If you're presenting to me, that's a home run.
Great, thanks. Olga?
Well, I think David covered the vast majority of it. I was going to say, the most important thing, start with the question you're trying to answer, and then answer it, as David said, and then tell me about what you did and didn't do and why. That's detail. So I think great advice from David.
This is great. I'm glad you're saying these things. Pooja?
I think David and Olga covered it. I mean, just remember, human mind kind of has to have limits of how many facts they can remember. So when you remind them, refresh them with a question, give that answer in 2 to 3 bullet points itself, because you want to repeat that 3 times during your conversation so that you can even end with what you started with, saying, so this is what exactly we are recommending to answer the question. It kind of wraps it up like a sandwich. So just remember the sandwich analogy and you'll be good, and try to explain it to the people in that way.
Ben, it's always hard to go last, but any advice?
So I'd like to sum it up in kind of 3 steps. So one is to go state the what. What's the problem at hand? Number 2, state the so what. What are the insights and implications for the business? And then close with now what. So what are the actions and next steps that we're going to go take?
Very pithy.
Knock that out. As David said, that's a home run with me.
Excellent. We've run over time. Again, thank you. And Jeff will close us out.
Great. Excellent panel. Lot of great insights. And yeah, we're in the home stretch here. It's been a great day. I couldn't be more pleased with the turnout and the quality of every single session. And I'm just very appreciative, especially of this group, with your time and how valuable it is. And it's 5 o'clock somewhere, almost in Winston-Salem. So we'll wind down the conference. We'll have another conference next year, probably about the same time, and perhaps in Charlotte in person. Time will tell.